I've got a bunch of sedition cases against me now filed in 3 states. So
you've said that we are more Hindu than BJP.
Today's India, this Naya Bharat of which the BJP speaks, has become a nation where narrow-minded majoritarianism prevails. I want my India to be a place where you won't get lynched for the food you eat, marginalized for the faith you hold dear, criminalized for the person you love. From 2014 onwards, it's been an uphill struggle. I've had case after case slapped against me, demonization and caricaturing and trolling. There have been some deeply hurtful personal allegations. It's not been easy, and I'm not prepared to quit. There's still some fight left in me. One of the more lively and enjoyable conversations I've had, because very often in these interviews I find repeating myself because the same sorts of questions tend to get asked, but you guys asked all sorts of things I haven't been asked before, so it was fun to be able to talk about. Thank you very much. It's excellent to be with you, Anku.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tharoor, for finding time for all our listeners and viewers. And it is our pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much. It's excellent to be with you, Anku. And I apologize to any of the listeners who've been waiting for my appearance. But here I am. Great.
Okay. So, Dr. Tharoor, let me begin this discussion with you with something. We just had Republic Day there, right? And I was so intrigued when I was researching about you by that letter to India. That's a very unique way, indeed, I should say. It's a very creative way to go by. And you said an inclusive and progressive nation we look forward to. So I had a question there. Do you think that we still lack that inclusiveness? And how do you say that? Because you have said that we are more Hindu than BJP. We are more inclusive than we currently are. So can you just begin telling me your understanding there?
Let's not go in for competitive Hinduism, but let's certainly talk about inclusion, because honestly, today's India, this Naya Bharat of which the BJP speaks, has become a nation where narrow-minded majoritarianism prevails. We've had incidents of communal violence, mob lynching, cow vigilantism, these cow rakshaks and zealots who have been going after innocent people, very often only on communal grounds. And in this grotesque new India, even Bharat Mata Ki Jai and Jai Shri Ram have become rallying cries of bigotry, rather than the beautiful slogans that Indians should be free to use or not as they wish. Human beings have been assaulted, killed in the name of protecting the mother cow. Muslims and Dalits have been victimized. We can go on and on. I don't want to repeat the tale of woe that we're all familiar with. But I remember a line from the columnist Pratap Bhanu Mehta, who asked about a year ago, how did this fantasy of hope, painted in the colors of a nation marching to one tune and one purpose, completely blanket out the actual republic of fear? Yes. You don't want your country to be a republic of fear. You know, I want my India to be a place where you won't get lynched for the food you eat, marginalized for the faith you hold dear, criminalized for the person you love, or imprisoned for making use of fundamental rights guaranteed by your own constitution.
True.
We must look forward to an India that celebrates and welcomes pluralism. That's what I mean by inclusiveness. It's an idea vindicated by our history. It's uniquely suited to our country because we have so much diversity in our country. Totally. And the idea of India that our founding fathers and mothers believed in when they wrote the Constitution of India that we just celebrated a few days ago, that was an India that would be large and capacious and inclusive and plural, and that would give everyone the same stake that the majority community member should feel that he or she has. I mean, you can't reduce this vast and diverse land to a slogan of Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan, which is unfortunately what the BJP has been trying to do. So that's why in my most recent book as well, The Battle of Belonging, I've argued for a reaffirmation of patriotism. And not patriotism in the empty jingoistic sense that the Hindutva supporters and the Sangh Parivar are pushing, but a genuine love for your country, which means for all of it, everyone in it, you love your country because it's yours, but equally, just as you belong to it, it belongs to you. But you also accept that some Muslim sitting in Kashmir, some Naga, some Malayali in Kerala has as much rights to that same sense of belonging as a Hindi-speaking UP wala in Kanpur. Now, if you can get that right, then our country, I think, will be in the absolute right place.
So you don't think, Dr. Tharoor, getting financially inclusive or even having the Kashmir article, they have just got that abrogation done. So do you think that has not helped in inclusiveness somewhere to bring together the country, get them a sense of belongingness, whether it is the Northeast we talk about or Kashmir, or financial inclusiveness by opening the bank accounts in the rural lands? How do you look at that?
So I'm totally with the government on the financial inclusion, except that they overlooked the fact that it was started under Dr. Manmohan Singh. But certainly it has accelerated, especially with the so-called Jan Dhan scheme. Yes. My only complaint with the Jan Dhan scheme was for the first year, 92% of those accounts were zero balance accounts, which really doesn't serve any purpose. But as government schemes are now beginning to put money in them, I'm quite happy with financial inclusion. And I agree that's also a very important issue. When we speak of inclusiveness, it can't just be for religious communities or regions or languages. It's also got to take into account the underprivileged, the poor, the marginalized. They also need to be included in the grand narrative of India. So I don't disagree with you at all on that. When it comes to Kashmir and 370, I'll tell you what the problem is. You include people in the ways in which they want to be included. Including people by force, is that inclusion or is that compulsion? Who was consulted in Kashmir before Article 370 was abrogated? The assembly was suspended, the elected representatives, the Kashmiri people weren't there to be consulted, and you basically ask the views of a governor that you yourself have appointed, and then you say, oh, Kashmir agrees because the governor agreed. The governor is your appointee. What do you expect him to say? In these circumstances, honestly, I think that the inclusiveness would be far fairer and more honest if it had come with a voluntary participation and consultation with a significant majority of the people of Kashmir.
So you believe a more democratic approach could have been a better way to approach these inclusive steps that they have taken. But coming to the current state, the farmers' agitation, do you think a more sensitive approach could have been taken by the government? Because your tweet are really interesting, I have to say. One said that, do you think this farmers' agitation looks like a left-wing versus right-wing drama? Do you think it fits there well? Or it's also one of the insensitive way of looking at it?
No, I think that's insensitive in the sense that the issue is actually the same one we talked about with 370. Why did the government pass these laws in such haste without consulting the stakeholders? I mean, my point is precisely democracy is not just about you win an election once every 5 years and that gives you the freedom to do what you want because you have a majority in parliament. That's a very mistaken notion of democracy, Anku. The fact is that the government has won the mandate from the people to run the government and thereby to guide the country in its chosen direction. But nowhere does it say that means you can completely ignore the wishes of the people in whose name you claim to be ruling. Okay. You have to consult. So you want to pass farm laws? Consult farmers. There are 40 farm unions in North India alone. Consult them. Many of the political parties have farm unions or Kisan Sabhas. Consult them. Get a cross-sectional opinion. Put your bills before the Standing Committee in Parliament for Agriculture because the MPs there can represent the views of constituents better than some bureaucrat who writes a law can do. And then after you have got all the concerns, you can actually better anticipate the problems. You may still do. I'm not saying that everything in this country can only happen if everyone agrees. That would be a recipe for disaster because
it would take a longer time also.
Exactly. But what you do is you anticipate and prevent problems by expanding the consultation net. 70% of the laws passed under Dr. Manmohan Singh's UPA government, 70% had gone through the standing committees first. So there was extensive consultation, comments were taken into account, laws were redrafted. You know how many of the government's laws since their re-election in 2019 have gone to a standing committee? Precisely 0. How many went in their first term? 25%. So this is a government that doesn't believe in democracy, doesn't believe in consultation, basically thinks it has all the answers. So now they've come up with an opponent who is also saying, we don't want to compromise, we don't want to negotiate, you withdraw the laws and we'll talk. Now, the fact is that both sides are being obstinate about this, but the truth is, it started off with the government failing the nation and the farmers by not consulting any stakeholders. And it's very clear, if one thing that this agitation has made clear is that you have to provide some assurances to the people who feel their entire lives will be turned upside down by these laws.
Totally. The assurance should be.
Yeah, of course. And if the government feel that they can suspend the application, they announced a week ago they'll suspend it for 18 months, and the farmers said no. My own view is that if you can suspend it for 18 months, you can suspend it indefinitely, say we'll solve the problems and then come back. To be honest, the Parliament always has the authority to withdraw the laws. If the government introduces a new bill saying we are not going to give effect to these bills that were passed in the last session, that's perfectly all right. It can be a withdrawal of or suspension of bill. It's not a problem. They could also talk to the farmer unions more seriously from a tabula rasa, that is a blank slate, rather than doing so already armed with 3 laws that they say cannot be changed. I mean, frankly, the government should realize that in democracy, you just can't bulldoze your way through people. And that's something that if they've realized it after these 62, 63 days of the farmers' agitation, then they can take the country and this particular issue in a more constructive direction.
How do you look at the economic aspect? Do you think we have as progressively and actively taken care of the economic bulldozing that, the blow that we took during the COVID-19? Do you think that was managed with as much spontaneity as we managed the pandemic impact on health?
Yeah, no, I don't even think the pandemic was that well managed, Anku, and the classic exhibit to point to you is the haste with which the lockdown was announced. You know that the Prime Minister gave the nation 3 days notice before announcing a 12-hour lockdown on a Sunday, which was very easy for people, and even then it was an unevenly applied lockdown. Then suddenly give the nation 3.5 hours notice to shut down indefinitely. And what happened? You had the crisis that affected the whole nation, the migrant workers crisis. And it was calamitous. I've spoken to employers who say that, we could have made arrangements for our workers if only we had had the time. But at 8:30, when the Prime Minister finished speaking at night, where could the workers turn? They were only due back in the factories the next morning. And now we couldn't come and operate the factories. What can we arrange for them? So these were the kinds of questions that the government completely failed to anticipate in the haste. It was actually a very mismanaged pandemic. This craziness of doing it at 3.5 hours notice, just like demonetization, it's shock and awe. It's not governance. It's really bad management. And to my mind, the economy has witnessed an unconscionable betrayal of the aspirations of the people by the government they elected. We're looking at a situation where unemployment is the highest it has ever been since they began recording unemployment figures. Economic growth is in a complete tailspin, as you know. We plummeted to minus 23.9% in the first quarter. And then that is the third quarter of last fiscal year. And then we ended up talking about possibly only ending the year at about minus 10%. Well, China has grown, and many of the Western economies, if they've not grown, they've at least stayed slightly above the zero level. We are minus 10. How can we possibly look ourselves in the face and say we've handled the economy well? I would say we've actually failed to handle the economy.
Yes, totally.
Governments did not diagnose the problem correctly. The complete disaster on the fiscal stimulus idea. When even Western economies were pumping money into their economies. When a Conservative Party government in Britain was giving job guarantees to employers by saying, we will pay 80% of the salaries of your staff, don't lay them off. When America was thinking of talking of $1 trillion stimulus, our Prime Minister gave a totally fraudulent figure of 20 lakh crores, which simply wasn't the number that actually went into the economy. Everyone did the numbers and realized that it was actually only 1.2 lakh crores of fresh money, and the result, and much of that didn't come immediately. And so what are we seeing? We're seeing major industries in a state of collapse, including hospitality, tourism, and so on. We are seeing severe problems when it comes to issues such as, for example, the problems we're facing with regard to agriculture, the farmers' crisis. tourism, the MSMEs, the
Yes.
micro, small and medium enterprises, which are the backbone because they all employ small numbers of workers and they don't have, gigantic enterprises and capital. But there are so many of them that they employ the bulk of Indian workers and they
Yes.
can't function anymore. It's really been very, very poorly handled, Anku. I'm sorry. I know that you'll say, "Oh, well, the opposition is always critical," but
No, not at all.
show me something to point to, and I will
No,
praise it.
economically, we were criticizing it. Yes, it was not
Absolutely.
management. But
Absolutely.
I have an interesting segment here. So we have so many callers joining us. One calling us from Mumbai, Guneet Singh Chadha. He's a corporate lawyer and he has some questions for you.
Hi, Dr. Tharoor.
Hello, Guneet. How are you?
All well. I hope you're well,
Touch wood. What kind
especially
of
since
lawyer
last
are you?
evening.
Yes, exactly. As a lawyer, you can advise me whether I'm well or not.
Unfortunately, I'm a corporate lawyer.
Okay.
Uh, I would advise you to go to some other lawyer that way.
You're right. You're right. Well, I mean, I
Uh,
feel odd going to a criminal lawyer when I haven't committed any crime. Maybe I have to go to a constitutional lawyer who can explain to the judges and the cops what sedition actually is. But that's a different bridge to cross. Tell me,
well,
as a
you
corporate
have.
lawyer, what's on your mind?
I thought I'll just digress from the topic a little and touch upon something that your party is doing. My question is direct, fairly straightforward. Do you think the Congress is ready to counter this formidable election machinery of the Modi Shah BJP that we've seen? And if I recall correctly, in one of the interviews, you mentioned the three M's, which is manpower, media, and money. Do you think the party is ready on those lines, especially given 2024 is just 3 years away?
No, currently you're quite right. We can't match them in any of those three things. Manpower or muscle power, whatever it may be. They have five people to knock on every door in every constituency. We don't. I mean, I'll be very honest. In most places, we don't have that kind of organization. Money. You all know when they introduced the electoral bonds, that 95 to 97% of all the money that came in through electoral bonds has gone to the ruling party. And when it comes to media, I'm not repeating terms about Godi media and so on, but the fact is that the overwhelming majority of media outlets in this country have completely been either cudgeled or cajoled into supporting the government stand on every issue, right down to playing the game of distracting the public from the government's failures by blowing up some other issue and attracting the attention of the eyeballs and the viewers and the readers. So in these circumstances, uh, the ruling party's message it looks almost unchallenged, compounded by social media, where they have entire armies of organized trolls that are sitting around sending targeted messages to hundreds and hundreds of broadcast groups on WhatsApp and
Yes.
so on. You're looking at a situation where it's almost a battering ram that they're thrusting into the minds as well as the lives of the Indian public. So it's a big challenge. But don't forget that there have been periods in Indian history, in recent Indian history, when seemingly uh, absolutely unassailable governments with gigantic majorities, even larger than the BJP's majority today, have faced their comeuppance in the elections because the public just couldn't take it anymore. And I'm hoping that if we, in our own modest ways and with all our limitations of the three M's, if we can at least keep standing, keep punching, keep mentioning these concerns, that we will open the eyes of enough people and the public who are unhappy. In 2019, I asked many voters, why would a young person who voted for Mr. Modi in 2014 in the expectation of getting a job still vote for him in 2019 when he still doesn't have a job? Well, the answer is very simple. The BJP simply moved the goalposts. They were no longer seeking votes in the names of jobs. They said Pulwama, Balakot, Chhapan Inki Chhati, national security, and people went and voted for that. Now, how many more goalposts can they move? Where will they head the next time when there is neither an economy that is functioning, no jobs are available, there's no tangible achievements to point to? On the national security front, we've had the humiliation visited upon us by the Chinese in Galwan in Ladakh. Ultimately, where will the goalposts go for the BJP? So one's
Okay.
hope is that finally the public will say, let's give somebody else a chance because these guys don't have it. They haven't been able to deliver.
Just to understand, do you think, I mean, we've understood how the BJP has gone wrong and where it's gone wrong and how the people should think rather than what they're thinking. But taking this back to the Congress party, do you think internally there's an ideological struggle at this stage, especially vis-a-vis a democratic tolerance structure, given how the party has dealt with some senior leaders like Mr. Scindia, Mr. Pilot, and of course, very recently, Mr. Sanjay? Do you think that sends a message across party
Well,
lines in
look,
general?
Mr. Scindia clearly had his own ambitions of a personal nature, which he felt couldn't be fulfilled in the short term within the party, and he didn't want to wait for the longer term. Mr. Pilot, on the other hand, is still in the party and is a loyal member of it. And as far as Mr. Jha is concerned, he was actually president of the organization I run in the party, the All India Professionals Congress. He was the president of it in Maharashtra. So I do lament the loss, but he has stayed faithful to his values and principles, and all his writings continue to speak up for the liberal, inclusive values the Congress party stands for. So he's not being negative about the Congress. Internal issues, I would still rather resolve internally. We gain nothing by discussing them outside. But the fact is that there are internal issues that are still being played out. Some of us have tried to raise some of these issues. Some of them have been addressed by the current Congress president. And as you know, in the month of May, we are likely to have an election for a new president who will have a mandate to work in an inclusive manner. And I certainly hope that we can move on the right way in the year and a half that would remain in that president's term of office. So let's see how it goes in the middle of this year. All of us who really believe in the Congress's ideals, values, and principles also want it to be an effective vehicle for those ideas, values, and principles, which means the organization has to function effectively and strongly so that we can deliver on what we believe.
So I hope, Guneet, you got your answers there. Very, very comprehensively explained this time. And from there, Guneet, I moved to Aastha Singhania from London. She's joined us from London there. She's an independent editor there. And she has met you before also. So, Aastha, I think you're quite excited to put your question through. And it's called the Indian Abroad segment that we have. So we really have someone abroad sitting there talking.
Hello, Aastha. How are you?
Good evening, Dr. Tharoor.
Good evening.
How are you?
Good. Not too bad. Not too bad. Could be better, as Guneet was saying. But anyway.
I'm going to bring you back from politics a little bit about your new book. Battle of Belonging. And obviously I come from representing Indians abroad, so I know it's more like the partition of Indian soul, which you believe in. But as someone who's entered the UK, and this is for me, who came like 8 years ago, obviously not out of choice, I know probably I speak for most Indians settled here. It's always a conflict. There's a sense of belonging. We know we belong to India. We're born and brought up there. But now there's a sense of apprehension whether India is a country where was it the country that we grew up with? Is it the same country that we want to go back to? So there's a little limbo. Whether do we belong to England? Now, obviously, you have your own gripe with them, which is understandable. And or whether we belong to India. Now, how do you explore that? And how do we kind of, can you clear that for us, if anything?
Sure, Asta. Well, as you know, and you know it from my book as well, I made the journey in the opposite direction. I was born in England, moved to India. I then worked and lived abroad for a very long time, more than half my life, and chose to come back to India because I really felt that this was the country I wanted to serve and make a difference to my own people in. Now, I will tell you very honestly and truthfully that the India I left is not the India I came back to. And the India I came back to in 2008-9 is no longer that India. In just a short span of a dozen years, I have seen some dramatic transformations. An India where bigotry is openly expressed. I grew up in an India where things that I'm hearing today in the streets and out of the mouths of politicians would never even have been expressed behind closed doors in somebody's home because it would have been considered so prejudiced and bigoted. People would have been embarrassed to speak like that. Now they're speaking openly and publicly in those terms. So I am seeing a very different India from what I thought I was coming back to serve in. Now,
is social media to blame for it, you think?
To a great extent, but not exclusively. Because even in the pre-social media era, from the destruction of the Babri Masjid onwards in the early 90s, I would say there was a coarsening of our discourse that actually was visible and could be heard. If you trace social media back to the middle of the first decade of the century, because really I think Twitter, Facebook, and so on didn't exist till the second half of that first decade. I would say that you're really talking about a dozen years where social media has really had an impact. Look, as late as the 2009 elections, my first elections in India, the figure was 10% of the Indian population was connected to the internet. Today, we estimate that 925 million Indians are connected to the internet, of whom 80% are on their mobile phones. So you're reaching all sorts of people with very dangerous and often, frankly, distorted and dishonest messages, fake news, all of this stuff, which, because people perhaps may not have the education or the context to see it in, many of them are completely being sort of miseducated by WhatsApp University and being told all sorts of lies and post-truth statements, which sadly they don't know better. And they have, as a result, developed attitudes that have tended to reinforce the intolerant and bigoted message of the ruling party and the forces around it. Now, you say, is this therefore the India that you want to come back to? Well, I can only say, if coming back is still an option for you, then you have to be prepared to fight for the India of your dreams. I certainly found myself doing that. I didn't expect to when I came. From 2014 onwards, it's been an uphill struggle. I've had case after case slapped against me. I've had all sorts of demonization and caricaturing and trolling being conducted. I've had to grow a very thick skin, and it's not been easy, because there have been some deeply hurtful personal allegations that have been levied against me as well. So if you fight for something that you believe in, be prepared to pay a high price in this country, because that's what our country's public life has come to. But if you're talking about coming back to India because parents are here or grandparents are here or relatives are here, or the kind of food you like is available, or the culture you want to rejoice in is more accessible to you, you prefer the climate here to cold and benighted England, that's a different set of concerns. And there, the politics or the public discourse will matter less to you. So it's a personal choice you'll have to make. My own view to every Indian is, come back, India needs you. But if you want to be engaged in India's public space, then come back prepared to fight. Because at the moment, the people who are dominating this public space have a very regressive and, I'm afraid, not inclusive set of ideas which need to be challenged for the sake of our own country's people and our future in the world.
I think it's more for the next generation, where you want the next generation to be, completely rooted to the roots that I was brought up. And I mean, my son is born and brought up here, but to kind of make him connect to the India that we knew as of India is a bit of a challenge now.
That's going to be a problem. I mean, I can tell you truthfully, when I came back, that my children have both stayed on in the West, and now they're grown up and they're both married American citizens, and that's going to be that. I mean, they will never. It's certain they've made their choice, that they are going to be now. In fact, one of them has even changed his passport and become American. So that is one of the consequences. Now, it's a difficult choice. For me to be in India, knowing that in my old age and declining years, my children will be thousands of miles away, is not a nice feeling. But you have to tell yourself, this is ultimately what you want to be. Your contribution to the world is trying to make a difference in your country. And therefore, it's a sacrifice you're prepared to make. At least while I have the energy and the resources and the freedom, I hope to be able to travel at least once a year and see them and see my grandchildren. But it won't be the same as, being able to watch them grow up around me and all of that.
Yeah.
And that is a hard choice, So these are things in life that you always end up looking back on. And certainly there are many friends who tell me, is it all worthwhile? Go off and, spend your UN pension living comfortably in America and looking after your kids. Or at least, occasionally babysitting your grandkids. I only have one so far, but there'll be more, I'm sure, I hope. Rather than toiling and struggling where you're being attacked every day. Well, all I can say in response to that is I'm not a quitter, and I'm not prepared to quit for now. So let's see. There's still some fight left in me.
Well, Dr. Tharoor, I mean, if you agree to disagree, I mean, all you have to tell me, I'm just going to lay out some situations. If you agree, you have to say agree, disagree, and so on. So my first one would be, Modi has represented India abroad powerfully.
No, disagree.
Okay. India reiterates George Orwell's Animal Farm.
There's some people are trying to get it there that some animals, some Indians are more equal than others, but I think no, not yet. We're still fighting for an inclusive India. The battle is not lost yet.
And one last I have. So, do you think, Dr. Tharoor, you're the most misunderstood or misinterpreted netizen?
Well, on the net, I think a lot of people tend to get misinterpreted and attacked, but I would certainly include myself in the category of the most. I wouldn't say I'm the only one, but I'm right up there, somewhere bunched amongst the topmost misunderstood characters. I do my best to clarify things, but it doesn't always work.
So I would like Chetna to come on screen and very quickly wrap it up for Sir. He's been so kind. And let's give him that 2 minutes.
Hi, Dr. Tharoor.
Hi, Chetna.
Yeah, I'm just so happy. I've been making notes about everything that you've said. But just to end this on a lighter note, so we all know that you love words and you always keep telling people that there's a story behind every word. Now, being a visual artist, I feel every picture has a story behind it. So I just dug into your Instagram and found some photographs, and I would like you to tell us the story behind that photo. So I'll be sharing it on my screen now.
Okay, Chetna.
Okay, so this one.
Yeah, that's me and Kofi Annan on the honeymoon bench. He was actually my boss and colleague. He wasn't yet at that point Secretary General of the United Nations. He went on to become that. And I have to tell you that he remains one of my favorite people of all time. He and I visited India when he was Under Secretary General for Peacekeeping. We were official guests of the Indian Ministry of Defense to discuss peacekeeping issues with the army and address some of the institutions. And after we visited Agra, we had a side visit to the Taj Mahal, and this is a legacy of that. This will be January or so of 1995. Sadly, Kofi Annan passed away in 2018 at the age of 80. Before that, a couple of years before that, he'd come and spent an entire evening with me after I'd lost my wife, come to Delhi, and literally it was just him and me for 3-4 hours in my home. I enjoyed his love, his companionship, his deep care and concern, and I will never forget this extraordinary man. I think one of the great men of the century.
How nice is that? Quickly shift to the next one.
Yeah, so this next one, again, I got it from your Instagram, and I don't know the story behind it, but I would love for you to tell it.
Okay, no, it's just that this is what's called the Tattakada. You know, in Kerala, tea shops are ubiquitous on every sidewalk. Practically every junction has one. Many streets have them. And they often serve better tea than you can get in a 5-star hotel. So when I'm out on the campaign trail and so on, I very frequently, because I'm a bit of a tea addict, I'm somewhat notorious, like my distinguished predecessor, Krishna Menon, for having an endless, bottomless appetite for tea. There was a time when I would drink about 20 cups a day. I've tried to cut it back during the lockdown. But once I'm out on the trail again, I'm sure the numbers will go up once more. So I would often stop at these tattikadas, and there were 2 reasons for that. First of all, the quality of the tea. But secondly, it gave me a great opportunity to chat to the other people crowding around the tea stall and get a sense of the pulse of the people. You know, what's in their minds? What are they thinking about? It means sometimes all they want is selfies, but sometimes we'll get some serious conversations about some of the issues, and certainly during election campaigning time and so on, it's actually very useful. I would much rather do this than go and have a fancy meal in a fancy hotel.
How nice. So that's
So yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tharoor.
Oh, it was a very enjoyable conversation. Thank you so much, Anku and Guneet, Aastha, Chetna. One of the more lively and enjoyable conversations I've had, because very often in these interviews, I find myself repeating myself because the same sorts of questions tend to get asked, but you guys asked all sorts of things I haven't been asked before, so it was fun to be able to talk about them. Thank you very much.
Very kind of. I think John is really going to be mad at me for taking
That's okay. I'm sure there are 2 MPs waiting for me, and I'm sure they'll understand. I'm sure they have kept people waiting in their own times. All the best.
You're very, very pleased. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and Jai Hind. All the best. Bye.
Okay.